guys are on, this next section of notes. We did all this stuff yesterday, okay? And we are on to unit 3, okay? And so we're going to draw some of those things. My graphs on my PowerPoints aren't going to be great because it's through the PowerPoint extension for Chrome. But either way, try to do your best to understand. And I'm going to draw them all together and talk about what happens when we get to that point. Okay. So first things first, and I didn't change the date on this, but just to pick your brains, quick review from yesterday. Okay. To kind of see where you are at. Okay. Go ahead and take a second, pause the video, get an answer for each of these 3. And see if your answer matches mine. All right. So just number 1, real quick. 1978, we got big inflation problems. Remember, we talked about what like a normal inflation rate was, somewhere between 1% and 3%. So how do we fix inflation? Well, we've got to take money out of people's pockets. We got to make people stop spending it. Okay. Now, the tricky part here is we've got to say, okay, what can the Federal Reserve do? That's the banks. They're going to raise interest rates. That's all they can do, okay? They can only change the interest rates. They can't do anything else, okay, in this particular case. So number 1 is raise interest rates. Take money out of people's pockets, decrease demand for stuff. Number 2, 2009, President Obama, Congress, we had the 10% unemployment rate, very large problem nationally. What could they have done to stabilize the unemployment rate? Well, they wanted to put money in people's pockets, right? They wanted to stimulate the economy, loose money policy, inject money, which again, a few different terms that you might hear, okay? And the way that the federal government could do that, they have 2 options, remember? They can increase spending or they can decrease taxes, okay? Those are the only 2 things that they can do to increase spending. Get out of here. All right, and number 3 is the tricky one, okay? In 1982, we had a problem with high unemployment and high inflation. And so there's a fancy term for that. Some of you guys that have studied a little bit in U.S. history, you guys might know that term, which is stagflation, okay? And the problem is remember that when we fix unemployment, we pump money into people's pockets, right? We put money into people's pockets, so it increases their demand. Well, that's going to cause inflation to go up, okay? And if we do the opposite, we say, okay, inflation's the problem. Let's take money out of people's pockets. That's going to increase our unemployment, okay? So that's the tricky one. 1982 is the tricky one of those 3. Whatever one you picked, as long as you said, if the one that you were trying to fix and you said the right thing, you're pretty well set to go, okay? So just a quick review there. I think pretty straightforward on the MyAP stuff. Hopefully you figure out a way to do it, whether you email me those questions or whether you did it online. We'll figure it out. We'll give you credit, okay? If you didn't get my email, Brooklyn Messenger solved it. Get a hold of her. Okay, so good job, Brooklyn. I greatly appreciate it. I was driving myself crazy earlier between getting my kids' e-learning done and trying to figure out what we're doing for e-learning. Always an adventure, okay? So here's your aggregate demand, okay? And you're writing this down. Again, you've got your notes here. You've got kind of a big chunk of space. To write the graph. You might hold off on that for now, but you can get it copied down, and then you can add what I add to it. Wouldn't be a bad idea either. Okay, so our aggregate demand graph should look familiar. All right, and again, it's just everybody's demand added together, and we're going to include foreign consumers as well once we get to that particular point. Okay, same thing. As prices go up, we can't afford to buy as much stuff. They go down, we buy more stuff. Okay, we're going to have a supply line go through here in a little bit. All righty, which is going to give us an equilibrium GDP and also an equilibrium price level. We'll talk about that a little bit more in depth when I draw it for you guys. Okay, we're talking about the total demand, and again, we're going to tie it into GDP. Okay, and understand up here is kind of important too. Why? Sometimes you'll see this labeled as employment. I would label both. Okay, always do both. That way it ties us in. Notice why is employment, not unemployment, right? So as we go from here, 0% employment out to here, theoretically 100% employment. Okay. So again, GDP and employment move in the same direction. We kind of mentioned that as we go through it. Okay. So our aggregate demand, there's going to be four major entities that go into it. Okay. And those entities, okay, should look halfway familiar. Go back to your GDP stuff. All right. And we figured out GDP by adding in household consumption, which is what people buy, investments from businesses, which is what businesses buy. The government can buy a whole bunch of stuff as well. Okay. And then we didn't talk too much. We also have income from abroad. Okay. So foreign purchases minus what we spend on imports for us. Okay. So exports minus imports. Okay. So the United States tends to import more than they export. This X can be a negative number for us in a lot of cases. Okay. But if we can convince people to buy more of our stuff, okay, that's going to increase our aggregate demand. If we buy more foreign stuff, that means we're not buying our stuff. Okay. So if we decide to go buy more foreign stuff from, say, China, our aggregate demand would decrease. Okay. We'll talk about that. Kind of a lot of things to keep straight in a short period of time there. Okay. So we're scrolling down your notes here. We're getting in here. We're going to talk about each component individually. So as we scroll down, we've got your household consumption determinants. Okay. Take a quick second, write those down. We've got household income, household wealth. One thing I'll say about that, wealth and income are two different things. Wealth is like if I own land or even if I own like stocks. It's not quite the same as income. Okay. So like Warren Buffett is extremely wealthy. He owns a lot of stocks in his company. Okay. So wealth and income, a little bit different for what we're concerned about, probably pretty much the same. Okay. Interest rates, if interest rates change, meaning if interest rates lower, I can borrow more money. I buy more stuff. Okay. I kind of add that into there. Lower interest rate equals increase in demand. Okay. Which that's going to be affected by monetary policy. And we're not talking quite about too much about that right now, but monetary policy affects those interest rates more often than what other things might affect it. Okay. And then last, we've got the two, household debt. So again, sometimes higher interest rates, if I go more into debt, that means I've already basically spent all my money, right? Now I've got to pay it back. So my demand going forward is going to decrease. Okay. Makes things a little bit, just one more step you've got to kind of remember. And then we've also got confidence. So like right now, for example, you could say, hey, what's going to happen to the aggregate demand for stuff in the United States over the course of the next month? And people would say, well, we really don't know. We're not confident in what the economy is going to do. I'm not confident if I might have a job. As a teacher, I don't really feel that way. But, factory workers especially, they're not confident whether or not they're going to have a job. What's that going to do for aggregate demand of stuff here in the United States? Well, we're going to guess that that's going to decrease. Okay. Nice thing. ERDL. Okay. Increase right, decrease left. All our rules stay the same. If you're comfortable with that stuff, you're on the right track with being able to understand this aggregate demand. I would consider aggregate demand almost extremely the same as just normal demand. I really don't know very many differences, except we're going to throw in, a couple, not necessarily tricky things, but we're going to say, hey, listen, if the price of foreign goods goes down, what's that going to do for the demand of domestic goods? Okay. And so we would say, well, I'm going to buy more foreign goods because they're cheaper. So that's going to decrease my demand for domestic goods. Okay. So I'm trying to talk slow and I feel weird talking really slow because I'm trying to enunciate my words. But anyway, if you're annoyed, just pause it, write down what you're supposed to write. If you're as bored as me, you're begging to hear people talk besides your siblings. Right. So anyway, which it's my kids. So anyway, next one, we've got investment determinants. Okay. And basically there's only two of these. Okay. I believe. Yeah, there's only two of these investment determinants. And again, same kind of concept. Businesses behave a lot in the sense of consumers. And when we say business investment, it's just the idea that we're going to decide to build a building, which is an investment, right? I have to buy a building to be able to produce something and make money over time. That's an investment. Okay. So interest rates, right? If it's cheaper to borrow money, we're going to increase our demand. And we've also got some expectations, confidence in there too, right? May not be a really smart time to start a business right now if I'm getting into like an entrepreneur situation, right? Because like, well, I was going to buy this land and build a restaurant, let's say, and now I really don't know how long this coronavirus is going to last, so I'm just going to wait a little bit. So my current aggregate demand would decrease because I'm really just not sure if I should start that business. All right, next one we've got is government spending. Okay, and we've mentioned this before, and um, if the government decides to buy stuff. So whether or not, they say that, they're going to increase military spending. And, right now we have the situation where we're talking about a stimulus plan. And how is the government going to, have companies produce masks and ventilators? And I was just listening to the news and those types of things that, well, they've got to pay companies to do that stuff. And so that's going to increase government spending. All right. Now, notice I mentioned fiscal policy in both ways, right? Fiscal policy, increased government spending, increases aggregate demand. Well, taxes take away from consumers, but also increase potential spending opportunities. And so if the government were to say, and you won't hear them say this, if the government were to come out to say, and that, we're going to raise spending on getting these ventilators built, but we're also going to raise taxes on people, our aggregate demand, we're going to say, well, that's pretty inconclusive. We don't know if it's going to go up or we don't know if it's going to go down. And so sometimes it can have that double effect. Right now, what you're hearing is, though, they're just going to increase spending. They're going to go more into debt. That's monetary policy talk eventually, okay? They're going to go more into debt, which can be argued as a bad thing. But as of right now, we're going to halfway ignore that concept of it, okay? So again, in the future, if you want to say, maybe I shouldn't ignore it. So in the future, you might say, well, the government's going to go so far into debt they can't buy anything, or the government's going to go so far into debt they can't disperse Social Security payments. Well, now we have a different kind of discussion. For us, we're always going to say, hey, assume we've frozen in time, right? And as we freeze in time, what's going to happen if the government decreases Social Security payments, right? And we're saying, okay, well, that's going to decrease demand. They're decreasing spending. They're taking money out of people's pockets. And then we're going to be able to come up with our answer. Okay, so we're going to keep it really, really simple, not have to make these, extraordinary predictions in terms of where we really don't know how things are going to affect different people. All right. Exports and imports. Okay, net exports. All righty. Again, the determinants are there. We kind of mentioned them once already. So we've got income of foreign consumers. If that goes up, they're going to afford more of our stuff. All right. If our incomes rise, okay, and our households get higher, we might demand more imports. We don't have to take necessarily a guess, okay? The question would say something like, foreign countries' incomes have risen. They are willing and able to buy more American stuff. What does that do for the aggregate demand in the United States? We'll say that, okay? Exchange rates, we'll talk way about later. And in fact, we may not have to mention it. We did cut out a unit 6, which I'm 99% sure is exchange rates. We won't mention that too much as far as in our talks with the e-learning and what the test has decided to do. But if our currency gets stronger, okay, basically what that means is, right, we can afford more of their stuff, which is kind of good for us, but they can't afford our stuff. Okay, so, for example, we can afford a bunch of stuff from Mexico, right? The peso's currency is not very strong, but they can't afford to buy a whole bunch of our stuff. And so it's kind of a positive negative, right? The negative is that we're going to buy their stuff and it's going to hurt our GDP. The positive is that their stuff's pretty cheap, right? And they're not going to, though, also buy our stuff. So anyway, that kind of works both ways. And as you're going to see, as we keep moving forward, there's always these trade-offs, right? And as what we see is, hey, listen, as the government spends this money, okay, the good news is people keep their jobs, GDP stays up. What about inflation, right? And eventually, what about government debt? And so eventually, as we get into that stuff, we're going to see some changes, okay? Let's move on to aggregate supply real quick. There's a little bit less stuff to talk about, okay? So if you need a break, take a quick break, all right? I'm going to keep going here because it's easier to do one video, all right? And we're going to stop at aggregate supply and what we talk about with the short run aggregate supply. We're going to move to the long run aggregate supply probably on Thursday, okay? So anyway, all right, our aggregate supply graph, okay, is simply kind of the same thing. Is what is our economy able and willing to produce, all right, at a range of price levels. Now, price level is kind of a concept that we've got to be able to wrap our heads around, because price level for an RV company where they're paying people, $25, $30 an hour is different than the price level that you might see at, say, Walmart, right? They don't have to pay their workers that much. And so price level is just one of those things that we've got to say, okay, it's all extremely close related, and it's all going to affect kind of everybody at once. If for example, the RV company decides to raise their prices, okay, or their wages, all right, well, now all of a sudden I was making $13.50 an hour at Walmart. And I don't really want to work that hard at an RV factory unless they pay me like $35 an hour. And now they do, right? And now I might want to go work over there. And so the prices are going to affect how people behave and choose jobs. Okay, so understand that they're all, even though we're not going to set an actual number, okay, we're going to be able to say, all right, when prices go up somewhere and this demand for labor, right? And there's a reason why there's no one that makes minimum wage, okay, in Elkhart, Indiana right now, because they are, people are trying to convince the good workers to go work for them. Okay, so understand that aggregate supply, and we'll draw it up and make it hopefully pretty clear. It also includes wages, okay, and also includes the price of fuel, for example. Okay, so all that stuff goes into how much money a business can earn. All right, so our graph is pretty straightforward. Okay, and here's the big deal. All right, is in the short run, we're going to refer to this short run as a fixed wage period. Okay, and basically what that means is it's kind of the same concept as we're going to freeze time. All right, and basically, like if I was working at Walmart, for example, and Walmart said, hey, listen, the economy's doing bad, we got to cut your pay by $3 an hour. So you were making $13.50, okay, but now we're going to cut it down to $10.50 an hour. Well, we're going to assume that people in a lot of cases are going to quit rather than work. Okay, so we're going to take that ability from the employer, okay, of being able to change wages. We're going to say that that's not going to exist. Okay, and we're going to say that, again, like we said, if you lower wages, people are going to quit. Okay, so we're going to talk about the long run a little bit more in detail on Thursday. All right, but the short run, we're going to assume that workers have what we refer to as fixed wages. Okay, the fixed wage period. All right, a little bit more detail on that. Okay, again, minimum wage is a fixed wage, right? Because I can't pay you less than that money. Okay, other examples in real life, labor unions, unemployment type benefits make it difficult for wages to fall very quickly. Okay, or for people to accept lower wages. So, for example, right, unemployment, the benefit is basically $400 a week. That's $10 an hour, okay, which it's not the same as it used to be because people are making a lot more money around here now, right? Where, if the argument that I would hear sometimes is, well, people that are unemployed, they can go find like a minimum wage job. Why don't they do that? Well, minimum wage jobs pay $7.35. If I can get $10 an hour for being unemployed, why on earth would I go get a minimum wage job, right? So again, that's an example of a fixed wage period where now these wages, right, they're kind of stuck. The price that companies have to pay is stuck, right? It's fixed. So they can't convince people to work for less money. All right. And again, what we see is now we have to cut people from the labor force, right? So if I can't convince everybody to make less money, I'm going to get rid of some people, right? And we'll kind of talk about that with our graph. But if I'm going to get rid of people, okay, now that's going to create a situation where our GDP is going to go down. I can't be as productive, right? And on top of that, they can't take that income that they would have earned from me and spend it somewhere else, which decreases the GDP as well. Okay, so just another thing to kind of keep in mind, kind of common sense, but a lot to wrap your head around until you really think about it sometimes. And I shouldn't say common sense like you should come up with it with your on your own. I'm saying common sense in the sense that, like, oh yeah, that does make sense once you say it that way. All right, I got screwed up here. Okay, so we're going to draw this graph. You might want to add some stuff to it, okay? And you've got your aggregate supply. You've got some graphs down here that you can kind of add to. Hopefully you're seeing where you should put stuff, okay? We're going to stop before we get to this area here, okay? But we are going to talk about, what are some things which you might want to take your own notes. We're going to talk about some things that it represents when we shift the aggregate demand stuff. So you might want to have a sheet of notebook paper that you kind of add your own graphs with your own equilibrium. I didn't do a very good job on these graphs. I have the long run aggregate supply down here. Okay. That's kind of the next step. So take out your own notes, figure that out, what you're going to do. All right. And we're going to move over to the market board. I got to push pause here for a second. I've got to splice some videos, like I said earlier, which is new for me, but that's okay. And, kind of move forward from there. Okay. So we'll see you in a sec. All right. Hey guys, we're back here. We're going to do our best with what we've got to try to show you what we're trying to do. Okay. You guys might notice I am rocking a Larry Bird jersey today. Akins, that's for you, if you know who that is, if you're even watching the video. So anyway, we're going to try to draw this stuff out. I'm going to give you guys a couple tips. Hopefully be done with this here in the next 5 minutes. Okay. So first of all, just like before, we're going to draw our axes. Okay. So I got my price level axis. All right. So price level. All right. And remember, that's got to include wages in there. Okay. Don't forget that includes wages. Okay. So, we've got our price level, and then down here we've got our total output, which we're going to call real GDP. All right. And we're also going to mention that it's employment. Okay. And we mentioned that in the last video too. So GDP and employment, not unemployment. Okay. Employment, meaning that if we're way down here, here's our aggregate demand curve. Okay. If we're way down there, all right, aggregate demand, that means that our GDP is good. That means I'm making some money. Okay. So we're going to refer to that employment and that employment axis as we kind of move forward. All right. Right before we got off, we also introduced the short run aggregate supply curve. So that's going to be here. Okay. So our short run aggregate supply, remember, those are fixed wage period times. Okay, fixed wage period. All right, so I can see that it's kind of too small right there, but hopefully that makes it a little bit better. All righty, so we've got a couple things that can happen, right? We've only got a couple different shifts that we can do. All righty, and if we have situations and we go back to, let's just do demand first, right? So if you go back, reference your notes real quick, we have those. I mean, there's several demand shifters. We've got the consumption side of things. We've got the investment side. We've got the government side. We've got the imports, exports. So let's just say for whatever reason, all right, let's just use coronavirus as an example. Well, we're going to say people's confidence is going to decrease, right? We're going to decrease our demand for stuff. Okay, now let's talk about what that means. All right, now first of all, we have our equilibrium original, right? So we were here, right? We're going to label this. We're also going to call this axis Y. Okay, that's an abbreviation they use for output. Okay, so I'm going to say Y star, right? And then I've got price level star over here too. Okay, I didn't give myself tons of room. So coronavirus happens. People's confidence plummets. Okay, maybe some of you guys have already been talking with your parents or some friends and said, hey, you know what? Plane tickets are really cheap. Let's really try to go on spring break right now, right? So what's happened? People's confidence of being able to have a good time, not young people, by the way, but older people are like, hey, we can't go, we'll get sick. So what's happened to the price level of plane tickets? It's gone down, right? So we got PL1 right there. Okay, as price level's gone down, okay, well, they're going to sell less plane tickets. And eventually what we'll see is, in my prediction, there's going to be some travel restrictions. Our output's going to decrease too. Okay, so we've got a new output. Think about what this is showing us. Okay, we've got an employment level. Are some pilots or stewardess on airplanes going to lose their jobs? Yes. Okay, so as employment goes down, right? Employment, let's just say we were at 95% employment right there, just making up numbers. And now we're going to be at, say, 90% employment. We can see that. Are people spending less money on airplane tickets? Yes. Our GDP goes down also. Okay. So what we see with this is we see real GDP go down, employment go down, unemployment increase, and then we've got inflation, okay, is going to go down. So when we have a decrease in aggregate demand, this is what occurs. Okay, so again, the questions that you'll get is you're going to get a question like, hey, listen, let's assume that the government raises taxes. Okay, the government raises taxes. Okay, so I got to know they raise taxes. I got to decrease my aggregate demand. And they're going to say, how does that affect the unemployment rate? Okay, and you got to be able to remember, right, how these four things happen. If you can remember that this is employment and GDP and this is inflation, you're on the right track. Okay, for that particular graph. Now, again, the tricky thing is what did I call this axis? Employment, right? That's just so we can wrap our heads around it. It's one more thing to be able to use against the test. They'll ask you both. They'll say, well, what happens to the employment rate? They'll say, what happens to the unemployment rate? Okay, so you got to be careful when you read the question as you go through it. Okay, let's increase our aggregate demand here real quick. I'm going to keep everything there. All right. We'll use red. So let's increase our aggregate demand. So, hey, listen, let's say that, I don't know, the government gives us a stimulus plan. This is what they're trying to fix, right? So they give us a stimulus plan. So we've got new aggregate demand. All right. And we've got a new equilibrium point. We've got a new Y. We've got a new price level. My red's not showing up super well. Okay, makes your screen big when you go. Okay, and I better draw my originals in there too. All right, so what does that do? Let's just say again, this is going to be after the government's gone through some problems, right? So when the government's going to expect these things down here to occur, okay, this big decrease in demand, okay, well, what's going to be their fix? What are they going to do to keep this aggregate demand from going so far left that things are going to be bad? Okay, so they want to offer a stimulus plan. Okay, they want to shift our demand to the right. What's that going to occur? What's going to occur with that? Well, the hope is that GDP is going to increase. Employment is going to increase. Okay, unemployment is going to decrease. Okay, and inflation will probably increase too. Okay, remember, unemployment and inflation and GDP, you can't fix all of them. Okay, let's move forward here. We'll rip through the supply stuff, okay? Now, the supply is a little bit different, okay, because what we'll see tomorrow is the supply is going to cause two different problems, okay? So let's just talk about the positive one first, okay, the easy one to understand. So let's just say that we have an increase in technology, okay, and technology moves us forward. You know, we can dig deeper in the ground for oil. That makes oil prices go down. We got better machines. We got all these different things, okay, and we're going to increase our supply, these technological boosts, okay? So we got a new line there. So SRAS 1. All right. So we have this new line here. We need people to run these things, okay, theoretically. All right. And we need people to obviously spend the money that they're producing, okay? But the thing that we've got to remember is now it's cheaper, okay? Think about oil prices, you know, today versus even a year ago. Like, it's cheaper for businesses to produce stuff, okay? So when we have an increase in supply, remember ERDL, right? Don't forget ERDL, increase in supply, okay? When we have this increase in supply, our GDP is going to increase, all right? Our employment is going to increase, unemployment decrease, okay? And inflation is going to decrease also, okay? Theoretically, that's the idea, all righty? We don't get too many questions about increases in supply, to be honest, but you do want to know what happens. Let's talk about the very last one here, okay? And obviously, it's going to be a decrease in supply. All right, so decrease in supply, that could be, let's just say, an oil spill. Okay, that happened a few years ago down in the Gulf of Mexico. So let's just say an oil spill is going to cause a decrease in supply. So shift our supply to the left. Okay, what's going to happen if we have, you know, this natural disaster? We could also probably say, you know, like a war or something like that. So anyway, we've got a short run aggregate supply, new one. All right, we've got a new price level. All right. We've got a new GDP, right? So this causes big problems, okay? And so, you know, if we have this oil spill where we can't get oil, or a war where we're stuck from not being able to get resources from somewhere else, okay? Again, what we can expect, and again, this is a bad thing, right? Real GDP is going to go down. Employment's going to go down. Unemployment's going to go up, okay? And inflation is going to go up. So now we've got a double problem, right? When we have this and this, okay, both of them are bad. We get that, what we refer to as stagflation. Okay, that's a bad thing. We don't want that. Because now think about what happens. If the government's going to fix one of those things, right? And you can stop your notes right there, but listen. Okay, if the government's going to fix one of those things, what are they going to do? The government can only affect the demand curve, right? They can only put money in people's pockets, okay? And so if they're going to affect the demand curve, they've got two options, increase or decrease. Well, if they increase it, there's an increase in demand. Okay, so they get our GDP back to normal, but what's it do to our prices? What's it do to our price level? We've got really bad inflation now, right? They could say, okay, inflation's a big deal. Let's take money out of people's pockets. Let's solve this thing. So let's decrease our demand. Well, now we got prices going down, right? But our GDP goes even further to the left. All right. So that's kind of why you can't necessarily fix both. Tomorrow, we will talk about, okay, what the government can do to try to or the other option when the government doesn't do anything, okay? And then we'll tie that in with a My AP assignment. So no assignment for this particular thing. I obviously took a bunch of your time. Let these notes sink in. Really take some effort and taking some good notes. I'm also going to send you an email to the guy from the ACDC macroeconomics guy. He's pretty good too. I would watch me first. He goes a little bit faster. You might miss a couple little things. I give you a couple more little tips on the axes and things. But either way, you won't see this until you watch him anyway. So that's completely fine. So don't be afraid to ask questions. I appreciate your flexibility. Okay. I know a lot of you guys, I spent a lot of time dealing with that MyAP assignment today too. It was very extremely frustrating. So I appreciate your flexibility. The goal is, okay, and I know that you guys can do it, is to get a 3 on this AP exam so you can get some credit. Okay, that'd be pretty cool to be able to say that you did that. And I know that you can do it. If this stuff today that we just did makes some sense, okay, you're going to be all right. Let me know if my video is unclear and it's no good. Let me know, because to be honest, I don't play it and then watch it for myself for 25 minutes. So if it's bad, let me know. Okay. Any other questions? Communicate. My goal is, okay, my plan is, my hope is to have all the content we need to get done by May 1st. And if we can do that, then when we get back, if we get back, even if we don't, okay, we can review. And if we can review, we can figure out, we can practice all these types of problems on paper and some short answer things, and we can try to grade them and try to make some sense out of it. Because as you'll see, what's going to happen is all the units get tied together in the question. And so we have to have all the units in before we can really practice a whole lot of short answer problems. And so anyway, I appreciate your patience. Weather's supposed to get a little bit nicer the next few days. Don't be afraid to ask. We're going to start trying to, unless I say different, get a little bit like 20 minutes worth every day. That's e-learning. So that'd be 3 times a week. So we'll have this from tomorrow, which is Wednesday. Sorry, you guys don't know what day it is. And then we'll also have one on Thursday too. Okay. And I'll communicate that through email. I'll say that one more time. Email is the way to communicate. PowerSchool has let me down extraordinarily, at an extraordinary level. So I'm done with PowerSchool. Communicate through email. Okay. If you have questions, by all means, we can figure out what we need to do. Okay. Have a good couple days. All right. The weather's supposed to be nice. Get outside, get some exercise, keep being nice, keep being patient. And we'll talk again soon.